Oklahoma's school board has voted to approve what could become the nation's first publicly funded religious school. The application came from the Catholic Archdiocese of Oklahoma. It aims to create an online public charter school for students across the state from kindergarten through 12th grade. It would be funded by taxpayer dollars. And Oklahoma's Attorney General warns it's unconstitutional and opens the state to potential litigation. We're very lucky to have Laura Meckler join us. She is a national education writer for the Washington Post. Laura, was this decision by the school board essentially the vote? Was it essentially to provoke a legal fight?
Well, I don't know if that's their aim. I will say, though, that it is a stated aim of the Catholic Church. They have said that, yes, they want to provide this school to kids who don't have access to a private Catholic school, but they've also been pretty forthright about the fact that they are wanting to see this tested. They want to push the limits of government funding for religious education.
And I want to ask you how the Supreme Court would be likely to receive that. But first, the group, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, has vowed to challenge this. What is their strongest argument?
Well, I think their argument is a straightforward, First Amendment argument about the separation of church and state, and this is direct public funding of a religious education. So and we can talk more about the precedents where we've been inching towards this, but this would be sort of strip away any pretense that that's not what government is doing here, and that is in fact public funding of religion. And of course, the Constitution says that there shall be no establishment of religion, and many would argue, and historically the argument has been pretty well established, that when the government itself is funding religious activity, that's not allowed.
So their argument's pretty straightforward. It's there in the Constitution. But now give us a sense of the complexity or the context of how the Supreme Court has adjudicated several states affecting this over the last few years.
They've been just inching more and more toward what could be approval of a agreement like this. I mean, they started out in 2017 in a Missouri case. There was a state grant program to fund playground construction, and a religious school wanted to participate in it. And other private schools were allowed to get this money, and they said, well, hey, we're similarly situated. A playground, what's a playground? It's not religious activity. You're not paying for Bibles. You're just paying for a playground. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's okay. If other schools get it, the religious school should be able to get it. And then there was another step forward in a Montana case a couple of years ago, where that was a tax credit. People would get a tax break if they gave money, private money, to a scholarship granting program, and those scholarships would go to help pay for religious school tuition. So that was a little bit roundabout way of ultimately perhaps funding, you could argue, funding religion, but it was, again, private money ultimately going, albeit incentivized by a state tax credit. And the court said in that case, no, that is okay. Montana cannot exclude religious schools from participating in that program. And then last year, they went even further in a case in Maine, and that had to do with there was a program that allows kids who are in areas where there aren't enough kids for a public school to attend a private school, and then the government pays for it. And again, these were traditionally secular schools, but religious schools said, hey, why can you fund these and not us? And the court said, yes, it's up to the parents are making the decision. So if they want to choose a religious school, they should be allowed to. So that was a big step towards this. So now this would be an even bigger step, I think, where you directly have the state funding the operations of a school. Because a charter school, while it is independently operated, is a public school.
And finally, Laura, leaving aside the law for a minute, what do those who argue against this, what's the argument they make on educational teaching grounds? And is there one for why this is not a good idea?
Well, I guess the argument against it would be, do you want your, if you want to go to a religious school, that, you're free to do that, but that the public shouldn't necessarily be supporting that with taxpayer money, that essentially taxpayer money should not be going to fund religious activity. It could, in fact, in this case, be essentially paying for Bibles. We're not talking about playgrounds anymore. So I think that's the argument against it. Of course, the argument for it is this is choice. This is up to parents. If parents want to choose Montessori, let them choose Montessori. And they want to choose Catholicism, let them choose that. So that's sort of where the arguments are.
And we want to have you on again to talk about all the other places that choice is being implemented, because this isn't just happening in localized areas. It's really a movement across the state, but we're across the country. But we're out of time. Laura Meckler, national education writer for the Washington Post. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.